Alrighty, guys. I apologize again that I am away today. But welcome to the new unit. Yay, nervous system. Woo. For those of you that enjoy the human system stuff, I am excited. I hope you are also excited. I haven't recorded a lesson in quite a while, so here's hoping it's not absolute chaos. I'm using my husband's computer. I have my iPad to try to do some drawing stuff as we go. So we'll see how it goes. And if it's not great, then I will be back tomorrow and hopefully it'll be better. So I'm going to give you a lot of time because the first couple slides, you guys have a lot of writing that you're going to have to do. So yeah, welcome to the nervous system. This is where we're going to start learning about your brain, your spinal cord. We're going to learn about the structure of the nervous system today. So kind of a little just nice tiptoe into it, dipping your toe in kind of thing. So again, looking at the structure of the nervous system, we're going to look at the neurons, which are our brain cells, and the structures of those neurons and how they actually work. And we are going to look at reflexes and a reflex arc and kind of just set up our understanding of the nervous system before we move into learning about how your neurons actually talk to each other. And just a heads up, we are also going to be doing a lab tomorrow on reflexes as well. So we will delve a little bit deeper into all that fun stuff. So here's hoping this works. Beautiful. The nervous system with some wiggling brains and spinal cord action. So again, our plan for today, we're going to outline the nervous system or the organization of the nervous system. We're going to look at the structure of neurons and look at the difference between some of our basic neurons called sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. And again, we're going to look at the reflex arc and explain why reflexes are important and why we need them. So this is your first box on the front page of your paper. And I would try to draw it as close to how I have it on the board here. Give yourself lots of space because as you can see, there's empty boxes that we're going to be filling in. I'm going to click them slowly so that you're not overwhelmed with it all right at once. So I would title it nervous system, put a box around the nervous system, and then have central nervous system and peripheral nervous system coming off of that main nervous system block. So the central nervous system is made up of two main components here. I hope you can kind of guess what one of them is. We have our brain and spinal cord. And those are the only two parts of your central nervous system. I'm also hoping that my whiteboard drawings from this morning will still be on the board. But again, if not, I'm going to do kind of a digital version of it that you guys can hopefully follow along with as we go through this. So brain and spinal cord, the two components of your central nervous system. If you think of your body, what runs right down the center of you, you have the brain in the center of your head. And then off the back of your brain, down the center of your back, is your spinal cord. And they are the two things that connect to everything in your body and make everything happen. The brain, again, is kind of the control center. It is what makes all of the life-giving events occur. And the spinal cord is like the highway that helps to take the information from the brain and transmit it to the rest of your body. So very, very, very important system, which is why it's the central nervous system, controls literally everything else. Connected to your central nervous system is your peripheral nervous system. So if you think of like your peripheral vision, it's attached to your central nervous system, but it's not like the main component. It's not the controlling component necessarily. It's the thing that makes all of the stuff happen that the brain says needs to happen. So if your brain's like, hey, I need to breathe, the peripheral nervous system is what allows you to actually breathe. Hey, my heart needs to beat, the peripheral system makes that happen. So unfortunately, it's a little bit more complicated than our central nervous system, which again, just the brain and the spinal cord. So your peripheral nervous system has two main subdivisions, and then we are going to then further divide those subdivisions. So again, give yourself space while you're writing this information in the boxes. So peripheral nervous system, two main divisions. We have the somatic nervous system and your autonomic nervous system. Under the somatic nervous system, I would include the word voluntary. And the reason I want you to have voluntary under the somatic system is because this is the part of our peripheral nervous system that we have some control over. So me currently choosing to speak the words that are coming out of my mouth is because of the somatic nervous system. I can force my mouth to move in the certain ways that it needs to create the words that I want to say so that I can actually talk to you. My ridiculous hand movements and hand talking that I know that I do, that I apologize for. Technically, I have control over that, even though sometimes I feel like I don't. If I choose to stand up right now and walk across the room, that is voluntary. I'm choosing to do that. I'm making the conscious thought that I want to do that. So that, again, is controlled by my somatic nervous system. The other thing I'd like you to add to this is external environment or outside environment. And we want to have the external environment included because that is what this somatic nervous system is responding to, is stimuli from the outside of your body. So if it's hot or cold, your somatic nervous system can pick up on that and kind of react accordingly. If you burn yourself, your somatic nervous system says, hey, you're burning yourself. Maybe you should stop burning yourself. Or if you're touching something that's too cold, your hand is going to pull away from that because, again, you don't want to be injuring yourself. So your somatic system is helping you to interact with what's happening on the outside. The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, whereas somatic is voluntary, autonomic is involuntary. So I want you to think autonomic as automatic. It's happening without your control. So autonomic, involuntary, or automatic. And the other thing I want you to add under there is that it is responding to your internal environment. So all the stuff that's going on in your body. That, again, because it's happening inside of you, you want it to be controlled automatically because you don't want to have to be thinking about it. So your heartbeat, for example, you don't want to have to constantly be thinking beat, 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 beat. Same with breathing. You don't want to have to constantly be thinking breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, because if you fall asleep and you're not thinking about it anymore, then you could stop breathing, okay? So somatic, we have control. Autonomic, we don't. And the autonomic nervous system, because we don't have this control, it is a little bit more complicated And that's where our final two subdivisions are going to come in, where we have our parasympathetic nervous system. Under, I would write stress response. And it does are stressful body responses that happen because of the situation are controlled specific division of your nervous system. So your increased heart rate, your increased breathing, your digestion slowing, dilation of muscles to vessels, to some of make you want to run away from whatever danger might come to you. Your parasympathetic, on the other hand, it's the opposite. It is your recovery. This is a system that allows your body situation. So bring your breathing, bring your pupil to a normal size. You want to reduce and you want to go back to your night resting state. If you're living in a symptom response constantly, you're constantly having that like adrenaline rush. Two systems need to balance each other to make sure your body doesn't. So with the divisions of your nerve, again, more into kind of the memorizing part of bio compared to what we've been doing so far, but you still need to be able to the questions that I've seen the diploma ask is scenario impacted or the nervous system in, and I will give you examples to show you what that looks like. So it's not just memorizing this chart, understanding this chart and being able to apply. All right. You have a little box on the bottom. And I want to use this for a second. We'll see if it's going to let me. Here. Okay, I want to try sharing this instead for a second. Perfect. Okay. I want that to go away. Sorry. We have this new like whiteboard system thing that I've never used before. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so if you want to try to get super fancy, you can draw it super fancy, but you don't have to. Usually, and again, if I have this on the board already, you'll see what it looks like. But I usually draw a little like starburst looking thing like that with a bunch of just little lines coming off of it with a circle. Then a line with more lines. Okay, it looks kind of like an alien, which is fine. I'm going to add these, which kind of match the color on there. right. So that is how I would draw my neuron. Okay. And I'm going to flip back to the other one in a second. But just so you guys can see on my drawing what the different parts are, these weird little finger-like things coming off of the ends here, these are called dendrites. Okay. The middle part over here, this is the cell body. Because it is a nerve cell, it is still a cell, just like a regular cell. It just looks a little funny. The circle in the middle, that's the nucleus. Oh, and this is, let me try to, there we go, you can see that a little bit better. Okay, this line that's coming off the cell body over here probably would have helped better if I was using different colors. Like that. That is the axon. So that's this part right here. Okay. The little bubbles, these are called Schwann cells. And together, they're known as something called the myelin sheath. Oh, goodness, sorry. Okay, at the end, we have these things called terminal branches. And these little circles at the very end are called end plates. And lastly, there's these little spaces in between these little bubbles. And these are called the nodes of Ranvier, or nodes of Ranvier, apparently. Okay, so it looks complicated. It's a little crazy. You guys are going to get lots of practice with drawing these because we're going to see them a lot. We're going to be talking about different types of neurons, but again, they're kind of very, very busy. I'm going to flip back to this one so that you can either draw the one that I just had or draw one that looks like this. So again, we have our nucleus, which is the circle inside. So that again is where your DNA is. When these cells first start dividing during the formation of your brain and fetal development, they are going to undergo mitosis, and they're going to divide and create more of them. But you are stuck with very limited nerve cells. They do not like to undergo mitosis very often. So even though we have the nucleus here and we have the ability to do cell division, a lot of these cells just kind of hang out and don't divide. Again, we have our dendrites, which are these little, I don't know, finger-looking things is what I think of them as. And the dendrites are helping to kind of pick up information about what's going on. And I can't remember in your notes if you have a section where you need to fill out what each of these things does. If you do, I will go over that with you guys before we do the lab tomorrow. Oops, sorry. I moved my mouse the wrong way. Okay, again, we have the axon, which is this bit coming off of the cell body. And the axon is this long piece that goes all the way down here. Okay. Again, the little bubbles are called Schwann cells. And together, the Schwann cells create the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is just that, again, group of bubbles that cover the axon. In between the Schwann cells, or in between those bubbles, are those nodes of Ranvier. And it's basically just exposed axon. And then we have our terminal branches. Sometimes they may also be called axon branches. So just branches of the axon at the very end, or axonal branches. And then again, at the very end of the neuron, you have your end plates. And they're called end plates because they're at the end of the neuron, okay? And so with our anatomy of a nerve cell, it's important to understand how the information goes through the nerve cell. So if you think of your hand as a neuron, you have your little fingers, okay? The fingers are going to be the dendrites. And what do your fingers do? Your fingers pick up information. So I'm picking up my pencil, and then I'm sending that information to the brain saying, I am holding a pencil, okay? So the dendrites are like the fingers, okay? The palm of your hand is the cell body. If I drew a circle on the palm of my hand, that would be the nucleus. Then I want you to think of your arm. And your arm, then here, the forearm part will be the axon. Okay, so dendrites, cell body, axon. And then in the case of this specific neuron, I have a myelin sheath. So my sweater is going to be a layer that goes on top of the axon. And just think that imagine that it has cuts in it. This would be the myelin sheath. Okay, so again, axon, myelin sheath. It's just a layer that surrounds that axon. And just imagine that, again, there's spaces in that myelin sheath where the information can go. So we're picking up that information at the dendrites. We're sending it through the cell body. We're sending it down the axon. And then just imagine there's other fingers over here. Those are your terminal branches. And then your end plates, if I flip my hand around this way, would be like my fingernails. Okay, they're the end. And then you technically have another neuron that this neuron could be talking to, where the message could pass from the end plates of this neuron to the dendrites of another neuron. So the action potential, and this is something you need to write down, circle, star, highlight, make it ginormous, make it super important. The information travels from dendrites to end plates. Always, always, always. Dendrite, end plate. Dendrite, end plate. End plate is at the end. Okay? All right. When we're talking about neurons, we have 3 general types. So you guys have a little chart, and I think you're just filling in the titles at the top. I'm also trying to draw your little neuron deals real quick on my little whiteboard. So our 3 main types of neurons, you have sensory neurons that are sensing the environment, either internal or external. You have your interneurons, which are taking the information from the sensory neurons and passing them along to the motor neurons. And then the motor neurons are making you motor. They are taking the information and causing some sort of action to happen. And when we have these neurons all lined up together. They are going to look a little something like this. So the sensory neurons are going to be sending the information to the interneurons. Okay, so sensory to inter, and then the interneurons are going to send the information to the motor neurons. Sensory neurons are sending the information to the central nervous system. The interneuron is actually in the spinal cord. So it's in your central nervous system. And then your motor neuron is taking the information away from the central nervous system. Okay. And again, we have the dendrites here, and the information is traveling towards the end plates over here. And then from the end plates, it's going to jump to the dendrites of the next one. And that information is going to travel down towards the end plates. And then to the dendrites of the next one, travel to the end plates. So hopefully we're realizing that dendrite to end plate is important. All right. So nerve transmission. It's also important to understand that your neurons aren't always going to have a myelin sheath. Okay, so some of our neurons are going to be myelinated, which again means they have the little bubbles on the axon, and some are going to be unmyelinated, which means they don't have those bubbles. And what the myelin does, one of the things it does anyways, is it helps to increase the speed of the nerve transmission. And I'm going to show you again on my other board what that looks like. But those nodes between those little Schwann cell bubbles, instead of the nerve impulse having to travel down the entire axon very, very slowly the whole way from dendrites to end plates, the myelinated axons, they're able to jump from node to node because the myelin helps to insulate the axons, which just helps to make the message go quicker. And when we get into action potentials in a couple days, that'll make a little bit more sense. We do refer to the myelinated neurons in the nervous system as white matter and the unmyelinated neurons as gray matter. And the reason they have those terms is just because of what they look like under an MRI and a CT scan. Parts of them look a little bit more gray. Parts of them look a little bit more white because of how the myelin fluoresces under the imaging. So that's just where that name comes from. And again, I have seen questions where they use the terms white matter and gray matter in the past. So I like to just let you guys hear them at least once so that you know that they're terms that you should potentially focus on. Okay. Back to my little whiteboard, because this is just what we're doing, is back and forth and back and forth. So a myelinated axon, just to show you, again, bloop. And as you can see, they do not have to be pretty. The myelinated axon is where we have these bubbles of Schwann cells that insulate parts. All right, our nerve impulse again is going to enter the dendrite. So they're going to pick up that nerve impulse. It's going to travel through the cell body towards the axon, and then it's going to jump from node to node towards the end plate. Okay, this jumping is called saltatory conduction. And again, I will come back to that when we talk about nerve transmissions, which are also called action potentials. But myelinated axons send messages faster. Okay, because again, they just have to jump. On the other hand, an unmyelinated axon, just looks like this. Okay, it's a little sad. It doesn't have those bubbles on it. Okay, it's unmyelinated. Oops. They're going to send messages a little bit slower. And just to show that, again, the message is going to enter the dendrite. It's going to travel through the cell body. And then when it gets to the axon, it has to interact with the entire thing before it can move through the end plates. So again, those myelin sheath Schwann cell bubbles help to insulate the axon, which means that the message can move quicker. Okay. Myelinated again. And I'll scroll back up in a second. These ones are called white matter. Unmyelinated is called gray matter. Okay. Make sure I'm using the right mouse. There we go. So white matter versus gray matter. Okay. There are also going to be situations where you might have to have surgery, or maybe you've had like a cut or some sort of trauma where you've ended up severing some nerves and you end up with some nerve damage. And when you have nerve damage, sometimes there's a weird tingling that can happen or a loss of feeling that can happen. And sometimes you just never get that feeling back and it always stays numb. Sometimes, though, you'll get like a little zap through the healing process where that neuron has healed back together, that axon has reconnected, and we now have feeling to that area again. This is possible because of something called a neurolemma. And a neurolemma, I'm going to go back up here. It helps with this nerve regeneration process. Okay, so this is my axon, my original neuron that I drew here. And the axon is in red. A neurolemma is basically a second layer that surrounds the axon that promotes regeneration. I'm going to write this down here. Okay, so the neurolemma helps heal neurons. Okay. The special thing about the neurolemma, or I don't know if it's special, but the interesting thing about the neurolemma is that it is not found on any of the axons in the central nervous system. It is only found on those in the peripheral nervous system. So axons found in your brain and spinal cord do not have a neurolemma. So they do not have this regenerative structure. And because of that, most of the injuries that happen in the central nervous system or happen in your brain and spinal cord are going to be permanent. Because if we damage these axons and we cut them in half, we don't have this neurolemma, so those axons usually cannot fix themselves. So again, that's one of the reasons why central nervous system, spinal cord injuries, or brain injuries are usually permanent injuries. And that being said, we've been doing a whole lot of research and a lot of work with stem cells and other technologies to try to figure out if there's ways that we can potentially heal spinal cord injuries or potentially reverse spinal cord injuries and allow people who have become paralyzed due to some sort of injury have the ability to have movement again or potentially even be able to walk again. This week is a good week to talk about this, I guess. Yesterday was Green Shirt Day. We were, remembering the Humboldt Bronco accident where a lot of individuals unfortunately lost their lives. Again, there's the deaths of 16 people in 2018. There were also many survivors of this accident as well. And one of those survivors was, and I'm awful at pronouncing his name because it's like an Eastern European name and they just have different phonetics. But Ryan Struznicki, potentially. He ended up being paralyzed from the chest down. So he still had movement of his arms, but not of his legs, and had some limited mobility of his torso. In 2019, he went to Thailand and he had surgery. And he had this thing called a spinal epidural stimulator implanted into his spinal cord that basically just like zapped his spinal cord every once in a while with electrical impulses. And this stimulates the nerves in the spinal cord below where that stimulation is happening and allows the movement of his limbs. He was able to regain some of his mobility. He's not able to walk, but he has walked with assistance. So he's been able to get up and actually move. And he's also part of a wheelchair basketball team and hopes to play in the Paralympics. I think in the upcoming Paralympics or in the one that just potentially passed. But he has lots of goals and he was a very active individual before and didn't want to let this spinal cord injury stop him. And we're seeing this in a lot of cases where the technology is advancing and we're able to actually see people who are regaining movement where they're not fully paralyzed anymore, or people who are quadriplegic, so they're paralyzed from the neck down, have no movement in their limbs, be able to actually have some limited movement in their arms and potentially even some limited movement in their legs. Stem cells, again, the ability to use cells that can turn into any other cell because they're fancy magical cells of awesomeness. We're looking at ways to implant stem cells into spinal cords to see if we can kind of simulate the regeneration of neurons that way. So there's a lot of work going into healing these central nervous system injuries because, again, they don't have that neurolemma. So we're trying to find ways where we can kind of work around that. All right. Our last subject, and I know this is a lot, but welcome back to Human Systems. This is a very squeaky chair. You're baking some cookies because cookies are delicious and you're going to go get them out of the oven. But you're like your wonderful teacher here whose brain is turning into a literal, like, smushed up pile of mush. And you forget an oven mitt. So you just are like, distracted. You're doing stuff. You go and open the oven and you just grab your oven, or you grab your cookie sheet. You don't have oven mitts on. What happens? And usually I'm there for you to answer that question. So I'm just going to wait and see if maybe some of you will say something. And I'm going to pretend that you said you drop it because you're silly and you're grabbing onto this super, super, super hot thing and you burn yourself. But instead of holding onto it and being like, this is what do I do with it? You drop it. Your hand automatically let it go because you have fancy, wonderful protection mechanism from hurt. I'd like you to think that be harder than that. And we're like, no. I will tell you because just this last weekend at my party, I put them in a boiled them, and then my brain's like, hey, looking at the stove and seeing a little that says, yes, this is hot because you literally just used it to boil hot dogs. My brain was like, first finger, like, touch with my entire hand, and I put it on the hot burn. I wish you probably can't see it because the light is awful, but I blistered. I am just such a smart individual. Literally did this, but it could have been worse, even though I blistered it and it hurt and there were tears, and it was right before a bunch of 5-year-olds came over to my house and my hand was in the cold water and I was like, why am I so dumb? I could have had very severe 2nd to 3rd degree burns if I had held my hand on that piping hot burner any longer. But I luckily have this fancy defense mechanism called a reflex that allowed me to pull my hand away before I did any more severe damage. So the fun thing about reflexes is they bypass your brain. It's one of the only situations where your brain is not being told, hey, this is happening, maybe we should do something about it. It's just like, hey, we're going to do something about it and then tell the brain that something happened. So again, this is to prevent serious damage because the time it takes to get to your brain and then back down to your body to actually like move away from whatever's hurting you could take enough time to cause, in my case, 3rd degree burns. I have slight 2nd degree burns. So I'd take that because 3rd degree burns, again, is where you end up with nerve damage and it's really, really deep. It goes past that initial skin layer and goes into more of the deeper tissue and I would probably have had to go to the hospital, which I didn't have time for. So reflexes are going to bypass the brain. It's going to cause movement to happen. And then the information goes to your brain to say, hey, you're not the smartest person today. And maybe you shouldn't have put your hand on a hot stove. Okay, so you eventually do feel pain, but you don't initially feel pain. You're going to move first. And then a couple seconds later, you're going to be like, ow, why, brain? And then your brain's like, I didn't do anything. So reflexes, great, helpful, keep you safe. And you have lots of different types. And regardless of what type of reflex we look at, same steps every single time. You need to know these steps. You need to be familiar with a reflex arc diagram. I'm going to show you lots of different types over the next few days. You will get a reflex question on your diploma exam. I promise. The first thing, there's a stimulus. That stimulus could be hot. That stimulus could be really cold. That stimulus could be really sharp. Because sometimes you're just like, hey, is that sharp? And then you poke it and your body's like, yes, why did you poke that? So the stimulus is going to trigger your sensory receptor. And we'll be getting into more detail on different types of sensory receptors. In this case, it's a temperature receptor that's saying, this is really hot. Why are you touching fire? The sensory receptor is going to stimulate the sensory neuron, which in this case is colored in red on the diagram. So stimulus to sensory receptor says, hey, sensory neuron, this is hot. We should probably move. The sensory neuron is going to send the information to the interneuron, which is found in the spinal cord. That's just this little tiny one right here. And then the interneuron is sending that information to the motor neuron, not the brain yet, the motor neuron, which is the blue one right here. The motor neuron is connected to this muscle. In this case, it's your bicep and tricep muscles. The muscle, again, is usually referred to as the effector because it's going to cause an effect of some sort. And the effector, in this case, the muscle, is going to contract, causing a response, which in this case is the hand moving away from the fire that this person is sticking their finger in for some reason. Just like I, for some reason, stuck my hand on a hot stove. So stimulus, sensory receptor, to sensory neuron, to interneuron, to motor neuron. The motor neuron is going to impact the muscle, which is usually an effector that is usually a muscle. And then that muscle is going to cause a response, which is usually to pull away or move away or run away or like do something to protect you from that stimulus. So on this diagram, or I think you guys have a list that you're filling out, stimulus is number 1. So 1, 2 for your sensory receptor, 3 for your sensory neuron, 4 for your interneuron, 5 for the motor neuron, 6 for the effector, and then 7 for the response. And the same time, just so you guys also know, the same time the interneuron is passing information to the motor neuron to say, hey, we need to move, it does also pass information up to the brain, but it takes a little bit longer again to get to the brain. So again, you've moved away from whatever is harming you before your brain realizes what happened. So help to protect you from bad things happening. All right, go back there. So that is the intro, the very long intro, I know, I'm sorry, to our nervous system. Depending on what time we have right now, I do have computers booked, and I want you guys to do a little bit of research. You can work together, okay, combine your brain's power, but I want you guys to research some different types of reflexes and what parts of the body they're impacting. So there's a little research activity that you're going to do, and that's going to help prepare you for the reflex lab that we're going to be doing tomorrow. So if you don't finish it in class today, I would like you to take it home and to try to answer some of those questions as best as you can, to, again, prepare you for our lab tomorrow. And with the lab tomorrow, you guys are going to be testing each other's reflexes. So you're going to be testing the knee reflex, so the one where you hit each other's knees and cause the foot to kick. Okay. We're also going to be doing an Achilles reflex. So if it's possible to not wear boots tomorrow or super high backed shoes, that would be awesome, because we need access to your ankles. Some of you are also going to do the Babinski reflex, which is the base of your foot. I know feet are gross, but it's an interesting one to see for when it works. And you are basically going to rub something along the bottom of the foot, and see if the toes curl, which is what it's supposed to do. And then we're also going to test our pupil reflexes. So some of you will need to have your phones tomorrow, because we're needing the flashlights on the phones just so that you guys can see what the pupil reflex looks like. So fun fact, there's a couple different reflexes that you could potentially look at for the reflex research activity. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. All right. So that's it from me. I hope this worked okay, and hopefully it wasn't too terribly boring. Again, I know we don't always enjoy this whole digital part of life. And yeah, I'm just going to try to figure out how to stop recording, and I will see you guys tomorrow. So have a great rest of your day while I am slowly figuring this out, because I am kind of not super techie tech. All right. See you guys later. Have a great day.